Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Through Thick and Thin for episode 8. Today, I have a guest who I am excited to introduce you guys to. So, today I brought on Jessica Whaley. She is a licensed social worker in New Jersey who's pretty open about talking about her previous experiences with disordered eating and diet culture. So, I'm excited to have a conversation with her today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
So, for people who don't really know you, maybe we can get started with like what is your personal history with diet culture and disordered eating? Like how do these topics affect you personally?
Yeah, so I was born in the 90s, so I feel like I was already born with this predisposition to um being influenced by diet culture. Um and I remember I would say probably like from a young age, I really had this disordered relationship with food. Um I am 5'6" and I've been 5'6" since 5th grade, and I always kind of joke about that. Which is a pretty average height, but I always felt, like just a much bigger person than my peers, which kind of always really added to my like perception about myself. I was very athletic, so I ate a lot of food, and I was always kind of commented on for that
Hmm.
by my friends' parents and my friends who were much smaller than me, and it kind of always led into this thought of like something's not right with this. Why are people saying these things? I just played basketball for 4 hours, shouldn't I be eating this? And kind of slowly like coming into my brain of like maybe I shouldn't be. Maybe if I didn't do this, people would say less, and I wouldn't kind of feel like I stand out. Um, and then, as I kind of started growing up, heavily influenced by the media, like I didn't feel right in my own skin. I wanted to feel like I thought everybody else felt. And I remember, people just commenting on me being taller, having long legs, saying like, oh, you could be a model. And my thought is always like, well, I would be considered a plus size model, which is like so irrational because I'm like 12 years old. And like already these things are kind of creeping in my head because I just didn't feel like I looked like what everybody else looked like. I didn't feel like I looked like how everybody else probably felt like, um, despite that not being true. I looked like everybody else, but it was just so easy for me to really get caught up, just even from a young kid. Long answer, but
No, I appreciate it. And I think it's interesting. I had a personally like similar experience where I hit puberty early and then I was like the height, I'm 5'5". I was the height that I am now. Yeah, when I was in like fourth grade maybe. So all my pictures, I'm like taller than everybody. And I think for especially for young girls who like hit puberty before boys or depending on like what your growth spurt looks like, you feel like large and that comparison and just that like internal insecurity. And a lot of my clients that are around that age, like between 13 and 15, the ones who come to see me for disordered eating, it's the number one thing they say is like, I am bigger than my friends. I am taller. My legs are bigger. And it's just because their body type is different. They're athletes or, they've matured. So I think if so many people have experienced this, it's like, why aren't we like talking more openly about it? So I don't know. I just think that's interesting.
yeah, exactly. I remember very much like not being able to fit into like limited two sizes anymore, and my friends still being able to.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking like, oh, there's something wrong with me because
Mm-hmm.
I should be in this size because that's what this other person is, without taking into consideration 6 inches taller than them. Like,
Yeah.
like my relationship with exercise looks different. My family history looks different. Instead, it was so easy for me to get caught in the I should be this.
Yeah. When you said limited too, I brought flashbacks, but I remember like Hollister, like those tiny low rise jeans that like did not stretch or give any give, and I would just try to squeeze into them as much as possible. And I've always been like fairly curvy and have an athletic build, and it was just not happening. And I'd be so envious of my friends who could like, just walk around in them. And yeah, we internalize that, and it's not something I think that kids don't openly speak of.
Yeah.
So kind of segueing, but I'm curious so I was saying earlier you're a licensed social worker, and I was wondering how your education and your work in that field has impacted your recovery with disordered eating or your body image, if it has at all.
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing how this has really affected me is, being a social worker and going through school and working in the field, there is so much emphasis on self-reflection and recognizing, our own areas and where I need support in. And a lot of times, working with clients, you don't always know what's going to come up, and you don't always know what, they could be coming in looking for one service, and then deeper diving, all of these other things are coming to surface, and really being able to understand how important it is that I've done the work on myself and that I continue to do the work on myself, to not kind of get caught back up in that when working with somebody. And I don't typically work with people who struggle with disordered eating as a specialty, like per se. But I've noticed over the years how many people struggle with conversations about food, conversations about their body, pretty intrusive thoughts about this that they might not necessarily see the harm that it's doing, but it's obvious to like me. Even how much that varies depending on the population that I work with. Like I worked with court-involved persons who were just, either recently incarcerated or had been incarcerated for half their life. And, hearing those conversations about food insecurity, what their relationship looks like to it now, just in a day-to-day, not even in like we're here to talk about food, but just in how the conversation naturally moves when people make comments about lunch we provided or things like that. And then having that, be so different to when I worked with teenagers in out of home, and like what their relationship to food looked like based off their family experiences and what it looked like as a younger child with them. Even if that's not necessarily the things that are coming up or that they're there to seek services for, I'm noticing more and more, and especially in my own life, like how much the conversation around food, around diet culture, around exercise to eat, really is prevalent. And even though it's not an area that personally I want to specialize in and that I, make a lot of effort to work in, I can't ignore how like I said, how prevalent it actually is.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, I love a good self-reflection or introspective piece. So I'm wondering what things have you done to work on that in your own personal healing as a practitioner or clinician?
Yeah, so I will say the last time I really sought like services and treatment, I went to inpatient treatment eating disorder for a couple times. And so the last time I went was in 2016. And that was prior to me stopping drinking. And so I don't want to say I necessarily was like ready to do that at that point. But it's what my life looked like.
Yeah.
And I was seeking services for all these types of things that I was struggling with. And when I stopped drinking, and it was about 6 months after I had went to treatment for an eating disorder, forced me to have to really look at what this looked like in my life. And so that was around 2017 at that point. And I really struggled with doing anything to kind of heal my relationship to food because I was kind of fixated on something else now. I was fixated on like, how do I stay sober? Building in like a community, having new supports for this new lifestyle that I'm gonna be adopting now. Um, and I will say, like, I really struggled to kind of do anything. I had a lot of recognition and I had a lot of self-awareness of like, this relationship is pretty bad to food. And like, I had a lot of good foods, bad foods. I had a lot of self-awareness around like food anxiety and around exercise and food. And that's kind of where I left it for a little bit, was just having the awareness, but not really having any action on it. And so I would say the last maybe 5 years or so, I've really had to re-examine that and really understand and kind of lean into those feelings that come up. So a lot of it for me is like, I can recognize where I have food anxiety and where like, this is not a safe food for me.
Mhm.
And then really kind of lean into like what that felt like. And like, what does it feel like for a food to not feel safe to me? And like, what does it feel like to kind of try it anyway and be able to kind of recognize that this food doesn't feel safe. I'm trying it anyway. I ate the food and what's happening to me afterwards. And kind of recognizing that I am safe. I am okay. If I eat rice, I'm gonna be okay.
Yeah.
And I'm okay before I eat rice, you know? But like understanding that like I wanted a better life for myself. And that's why I initially sought treatment. And I wanted a better life for myself. And that's why I got sober. And if I'm, you know, taking these steps, but then not having any continued action on it, I'm not giving myself a better life. And I found myself
Mm.
really starting to get back in my head and really starting to struggle with relationships, struggle to be present. I was living on my own, struggling to have accountability. And so much of it was, like I said, I want something better for myself. This has been really prominent, like this sort of relationship with food for so much of my life, that if I can't hold myself accountable, how are things going to be different?
Mm.
And that's not easy, you know, like it's so much easier for me to sit here and say that now.
Sure.
But what that really looked like, it was messy. You know, it looks a lot like me really struggling to sit with my stomach being full
Mhm.
and know that there's not going to be a doctor coming in and doing a blind wait for me to tell me if I did well or not. You
Mhm.
know, it looked like a lot of me making plans of eating with people and having plans after, so that I could get through those moments of feeling uncomfortable, of feeling full, and know that, like, I'm not gonna have to be alone during that.
Mhm.
And that has really kind of, like, thrived for me now, of being able to know that, like, I just wanna be able to love the life that I have and love the person that I am. And so being able to kinda lean through those really challenging moments, recognize how all of my life experience have influenced that without judgment, and then now continue to be open about it. Like, now I, you know, have been with my partner for a couple of years now, and it's a lot easier for me to sit there and be like, "Hey, I'm having a little anxiety over this food,"
Mm.
and being able to kind of be vulnerable about that. And being able to recognize that, like, my relationship is so much more healed than it was, and I really minimally struggle with, like, fear foods, but being able to be like, "Hey, I need to see a menu because I'm kind of feeling anxious about this,"
Mhm.
and know that, like, that's where it can end, you know? It can end at me saying, "I'm feeling a little anxious," and it doesn't have to end with me crying, stressed, checking myself, picking myself apart in the mirror, seeing if these
Yeah.
clothes still fit, you know? And
Really.
continuing to stay mindful of that.
Yeah, and I think, that self-reflection piece, I mean, that's a lot of self-awareness is of what you're saying, and I think, you know, personally as well, as you go through the healing process, you start to realize, like, those feelings that bubble up, like you said, like that food anxiety or whatever it is, like I can name that feeling where before it may have just been too overwhelming to even try to label, or you don't have the language for it. a lot of like the things you said with fear foods and, trying to have community and support, did you think like you came up with that on your own? Was that some, learning experience you got from being in treatment? Like, where do you feel like you got that direction?
Yeah, so definitely the whole kind of like understanding fear foods was definitely a treatment thing. I don't think I would have been able to recognize that on my own. I think for a really long time, I played the I don't like this, I'm picky, this hurts my stomach. Um, when going back to the example of rice doesn't really hurt my stomach.
Mhm.
I don't really like it. I realize that now. I just don't really like it. Um, but I'm not avoiding it. The thoughts that I had around that were a lot more of like, this is a carb, it's heavy, and if something feels heavy,
Mhm.
then I'm heavy. Um, and now like I can just recognize like, it's
Yeah.
just kind of gross to me. It's kind of bland. And like be okay with that. But definitely being able to recognize that like, oh, I'm having these feelings around these types of food, and like I can now label it as a fear food to, start the awareness process of, how I'm feeling when I encounter this was definitely a treatment thing. I think a sense of community really came from getting sober. I had friends all growing up, and I had good friends. I was definitely really lucky. I had really good people in my life. But as we grow up, we change a lot,
Mhm.
and being able to find something that aligns with the lifestyle that I want and need for myself at this moment is really important. And so getting sober and having a whole new community now of people who are my age, who are also aligning with the same things was really helpful. And so which I think helped me to lead me to be a little bit more vocal about my struggles with disordered eating.
Mhm.
Because it's similar to my sobriety, if I was keeping all that a secret, then I wasn't really allowing myself to be a part of the community. And if I'm keeping my disordered eating a secret, then I'm not allowing myself to heal. And that was a huge kind of curve for me. And by doing that, I've been able to have really good conversations with people over the years and recognize that, like, I'm not alone in all of this. The amount of people I know in my life who have struggled with disordered eating, who struggle with negative self-image, negative self-talk, like, it's probably everybody if I'm thinking about it, like, And so knowing that, like, I don't have to feel alone, I don't have to feel isolated was just so helpful because it allowed for the conversation to be feeling less, like, vulnerable for me. Absolutely. And I think so much of it came down to, like, having to be honest about myself, about what that like, with myself, about what that looked like. Um, and being honest about myself about what my relationship to food looked like during that time period too. Because like I said, if I was keeping, if I'm being honest about my sobriety, then but I'm keeping my eating a secret, like, am I just kind of switching things out here? And a lot of it was hard, I was vegan when I stopped drinking, and I had stopped eating meat and most dairy products when I was 10 years old, and I really lived in this guise of it's for the environment, and it is, and I have a lot of thoughts on, farming food and the environment. I do have a lot of thoughts on that. But I had to be honest about why I was doing that. I had to be honest about what that diet, what that food preference really looked for me, and really how much it was allowing me to hide in my eating disorder rather than be open about my thoughts and beliefs in my recovery. So when I was first getting sober, one of the things that I kind of honestly had to take a look at was, I was vegan and I had stopped eating meat and most like dairy products when I was 10 years old. And, I ended up getting sober as soon as I turned 22. And it was interesting to me because it's like, I want this better lifestyle for myself. And then I, was living under the guise of, well, I'm vegan. But I was doing all these like horrible other things prior to that. But I was vegan, so it was fine. And a lot of it had to be like, I had to take a pretty honest look at that, of what that looked like, and I definitely have a lot of, thoughts and feelings and passions towards, food and the environment, and sustainability there and everything. So there is some truth rooted to why I was vegan, but I really had to look at how easy it was for me to be so restrictive, under the guise of, don't you guys know about sustainability? And really take an honest look at that and how it was affecting me, and at this point, it's been 3 years since I started eating meat again. And it's opened up a whole other slew of things that I didn't realize were an issue, like food textures get super skeeved out by certain things. But I want to say the really beautiful thing about all of this is that I get super skeeved out by food textures, but I try it anyway. And I see if I like it. Like I get to have these thoughts and conversations about like, why am I really doing the things that I'm doing? Am I telling myself that like eggs are gross if I've never eaten an egg before? And am I just living in that? Or am I like trying eggs and realizing that I love omelets, but I don't like egg white wraps, like recognizing that I can try these things and get through it and just being honest about why I wasn't in the first place. So that was a pretty huge thing that I want to say was messy, but also really catapulted me into a much healthier view, and much deeper understanding of my relationship with food, which was just it's been really great, honestly. And I realized that like I love buffalo chicken. Anytime I'm back home, like I go to Charlie's and get BBTs. Because I love it and because I want them and it makes me happy and I like spending time with my friends and eating them, and I don't have to worry now about, I just ate a plate of BBTs. What was happening to these chickens? Do I need to go to the gym? What am I doing tomorrow? Am I going to the beach? Instead, it's just like, man, I'm so happy that I get to be here and eat BBTs.
Yeah, and I think a few episodes so far, like when I spoke to Alyssa and I think when I spoke to Allie and myself personally, it's interesting how certain diets or like food sensitivities or how like yes, that is great and that's for some people who like really need that, but then I think if there is any history of disordered eating, I think like you said, it's not a right or wrong, it's what is your intention behind that, but how easily we can hide behind those things. Like for me, it was like the gluten-free, dairy-free. I think I was like pescatarian at something. And like, I think I was just grasping anything to be like, oh yeah, like I can't eat that because of like a sensitivity or XYZ or like, yeah, I don't want to, but, and then people don't really question that.
Yeah, exactly. It makes it really easy to kind of get away with really harmful patterns. And it was for me. And I will say, I think my parents did well at recognizing to some degree that there were supports. I needed some supports. I went to a nutritionist when I was younger, but I went to this nutritionist and I'm allergic to tree nuts. And I remember explaining that And her response was, "What can you eat?" And I said, "Peanuts and cashews. The other ones I'm allergic to." And she said, "Oh, well, of course you can have those. Those are the fatty nuts." And like, I don't understand, to this day, I still don't really understand the point of that comment.
Yeah.
But I really got to see what that looked like for me and how that affected me at like 14 years old.
Yeah.
Um, when I got out of treatment for the first time for an eating disorder, I went to another dietitian or nutritionist, different. Um, and and I remember her saying, "You just did a lot of hard work. It's okay if you have a lapse." And like these comments of it just kind of giving me the go ahead in my mind to not have to do the hard things, like, really became super impactful, and really halted my healing and kind of expedited, my disordered eating, because I kind of felt like I had the okay now to go ahead with what I was already doing, and nobody was really questioning, like, Jess hasn't eaten eggs, yogurt, meat
Hmm.
of any kind, in 15 years, like, and I kinda got away with being able to harm myself in the ways that I really wanted to.
Mm. Yeah, and I think like last episode, I spoke with Carly, who's a registered dietitian nutritionist, and we were kind of talking about, unfortunately, old school dietetics was not really as helpful, and still, even for like therapists and practitioners. I mean, for people who are like giving out nutrition advice when it's not their scope of practice at all, it can be really harmful and lead to like detrimental decisions um, on the client's end.
Yeah, absolutely, and I understand, looking back now, I can have, more perspective on that just wasn't the right avenue for me.
Sure.
They were probably very helpful to other people, it just wasn't
Mhm.
what was working for me. And like what I really needed to do and like deep dive and like what I really needed was therapy, like what I
Mhm.
really needed was to work on like why I had this relationship with food and like really understand the things that like caused it. And like for me, so much of it was um that like sense of control. So much
Mhm.
of it was that sense of, you know, meal times as a kid growing up were very chaotic and very unhealthy. And not supportive for myself or my brother. We really struggled with that growing up. Um, but then also understanding too of like how do I use that control? And so much of it for me was like I want to feel so small and be so small that no one notices me. And that I never have to worry about harm, risk, or anything bad happening because people don't even see me. And like if things are going on that I can't control, like I was in a pretty tumultuous relationship when I was, 19, 20. Um, if things are going on that I can't really control, what can I control? And I really, really leaned into food. I really leaned into that relationship. Um, and while it was well and good to go see, a dietitian to try and get
Mhm.
help, that's just not what I needed at the time. What I needed
Yeah.
was therapy. What I needed was to work on the things, that were really kind of deeply ingrained in me and how to unlearn that to have a healthier lifestyle.
People are surprised when I say that, like I work with a lot of clients who struggle with disordered eating, but we probably talk about food like 5 to 10% of the time.
Yeah.
And everything else is like, okay, what's underneath that, right? Because this is the maladaptive coping, you know, um, of yeah, control, anxiety, um, trying to make ourselves, fit in, blend out, like whatever it is. So I do think it's interesting of like it's about the food, but it's nothing about the food.
Yeah, exactly.
So I know you're pretty open about like trying different things with movement, and I know you do like CrossFit and like a few different types of physical activities. So I'm wondering how that or the experimentation, I guess you can call it, with movement has affected your feeling relationship with a body image or body dysmorphia.
Yeah, so I've always been really active my whole life. I was always very athletic growing up, and I love movement. I love it. I love being active. It makes me happy. Um, and I try a lot of different things because I like how it feels. Which is very simple and very nice now. But what was really important for me was those moments of when I really used it as a tool to aid my eating disorder. Um, and understanding that I had to kind of build a whole new relationship to exercise and movement. Um, so I initially started CrossFit because I had this crazy experience, and had Guillain-Barré, and I was temporarily paralyzed from the waist down, and I had to
Oh,
relearn how
wow.
to walk. And it was this really wild experience. And through that, I had to quite literally like walk again, and I was forced to try and understand movement differently. So when things kind of got going, I started CrossFit, and CrossFit really made me feel so excited about the things that my body could do. Like CrossFit, like at first, really, really pushed me to look at like, oh my God, I didn't know I could lift this weight. I didn't know I could do a pull up. I didn't know I could do a push up. Like, that's so cool. Like, this is why I have, this body to do things. And it got me really excited. Um, but the control in me, the like competitive nature in me, it didn't say that way. At first, it was really exciting. And I was like, well, I can do all these cool things. And then, I lift weight a little bit more easier, or a little easier. I got a couple more pull-ups, and I feel pretty good about myself. Um, and then I spent a little bit of time really diving into, comparing myself to others in the gym, and um, and using exercise as a form of control as well, of like, okay, things might not be like as bad with my food right now, but I'm still doing all of this, and I'm still spending hours at the gym when I could be spending time with my friends and family, and doing other things. Um, and so it was really kind of like unlearning what it means to be an athlete in my mind, and kind of understanding, like, once again, like, how does this feel for me? And so a lot of that ended up being like, I don't log my scores for things most of the time. A lot of that ended up being, maybe I don't go to CrossFit. Maybe I try a regular gym and see what it's like to bodybuild and how to lift weight and do that. Um, a lot of it came to when I moved to North Jersey, there's a lot more access to things. And that is when I was like, oh my gosh, I can try Orange Theory. I can try, there's like a rowing version of Orange Theory. I can try spin class. I can try pole dancing. I can try yoga. I can do all these different things to now kind of get a better idea of what movement feels like for me now that I'm not comparing myself. Which has been so healing and challenging. And I feel like, to a degree, it's not as bad for me anymore, but I still get those moments of recognizing that, like, exercise for me is for me, and it's because it makes me feel good. And if I don't have a bar muscle up, I still can feel good with the work that I do. If I can't do an unassisted handstand push-up, I can still feel good about the fact that, like, I moved my body. If I don't go to CrossFit for a week and I instead go to pole, I can still feel good that I moved my body in a way that makes me feel good within myself. And so I think that was what was so interesting to me, is it started out as something that was healing for me physically, and then kind of leaned into something emotionally, and then kind of like stirred it all up a little bit, and really forced me to recognize I thought I kind of healed, I thought I was recovered, but maybe it's not so much as I thought. Maybe I wasn't really addressing it, or maybe I'm just in a spot now where I can dig a little bit deeper. Um, And it got me to really feel okay with the fact that like none of this stuff is going to be linear. Um, and I may not be somebody that ever says like I am 100% recovered, but I can recognize that I'm somebody who's always going to explore recovery now because of how much better I feel in my life because of it.
And, as you're sharing, I'm like relating to so much of what you're saying. And I'm wondering, like, and this is more just like a hypothetical question, I guess. If this is what I do see often, almost like a personality trait, kind of like type A with people who struggle with disordered eating, with accountability, structure, rules, right? Or like if this is growing up as an athlete, right, who is expected to perform to a certain caliber and like you have fun, but then as you grow up being an athlete, it gets to a point where like it's not really fun anymore. It's kind
Yeah.
of more performance driven. And I had very similar relationship with movement. And I was in the midst of like CrossFit when I really started to look at my relationship with food. And I remember I was in, like my food group, and like facilitator was pretty much like, what is CrossFit serving you right now? Because when you go, and this isn't a CrossFit thing, this is like a me thing.
Exactly.
I was just, oh, I don't know where that came from. I guess some fireworks in the background. I was just beating myself up over it. If I wasn't perfect, right? This idea of perfection, it wasn't fun anymore. So all of these fears that I had, like I had to take a complete step back from it. And I took some time away, and I really loved the community aspect of it. So I would drop in, like once a week or whatever, and I wouldn't log my scores, or I don't even think I had access to it. But I had this fear of like, if I quit CrossFit or if I took a break from CrossFit, I would get like quote unquote fat, or I would gain weight. So I like pushed myself to do that and focused on like so many different other areas of movement. And I'm just now kind of getting back to it more regularly, but a completely different mindset. So, I do think you can't really take away like food and movement because they both deal with your body. We have made them like so transactional within this disordered relationship. So, I just always think that's interesting, hearing from others about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And through exploring movement that makes me feel more like right in my own body, I find myself not as fixated on what it looks like.
Mhm.
You know, I I have a friend who she talks a lot about how it's funny saying this, but like this is just her skin suit. It's her rocket ship for her soul. And that is so, hippy dippy. And and she's recently got more tattoos, and she said it's looking a little aged. I'm gonna decorate my skin suit. But really understanding of like kind of it sounds silly to say, but taking that in and recognizing that like I just want to feel right in my in my own
Mhm.
body, and like and being able to recognize that like when I feel right in my own skin and like who I am, I care less about the validation
Mhm.
from other people. I care more about it for myself. And recognizing that, cool, I can do these things, and it's okay if I don't look the same way I looked like 10 years ago. Um,
Mhm.
because my body has given me so much life experience in the meantime. Um, and I think that is what has been so much fun, especially moving, and having more access to things to try that make me feel feminine, that make me feel strong, that make me feel like empowered. It's been really great for my own self image.
Awesome. I love that, you know, that idea of the skin suit and how much emphasis we put on, I mean, really due to like diet and beauty culture, unfortunately, of like this is what especially women, right? We need to appear a certain way. We need to stay young forever. And it's like, God forbid you don't fit into the clothes that you have or that pair of jeans from high school. Instead of being at war with like our body, I think just shifting that perspective to gratitude, or even just thinking like how capable it is, how many memories it has allowed us to make and engage in, and rather than just that like self-hatred.
Exactly. Exactly.
So I wanted to see, obviously, this is something that is like a lifelong journey, and it sounds like you've been working on it for some time now. But what advice would you give someone who is morely like newly dipping their toe or interested in recovering from their relationship with disordered eating or diet culture?
That's a tough one. It's a tough one because I don't know if I would have listened, to anybody's advice if, when I was first kind of thinking about this. It was something that I know for me, I really had to kind of really be thrown into the desire. But I will say, what I wish I knew when I first started was how much I can learn and grow from just trying something new. So what I would say is somebody who's kind of dipping their toes in recovery, whether it's, trying the rice, to go back to that example, more so just trying the thing. So much of my healing has been an exploration of what it feels like to be me and to learn the things that I like and the things that make up me as a person. So what I really wish I knew, and what I would probably tell somebody just stepping into this, is just try the thing that you think might be about you. Try the hike or watch a different genre movie, see if you like it. Um, you know, Go to a new restaurant with friends if you want, or see if you like kayaking or just sitting at the water, or painting or crocheting. You know, a self-exploration of figuring out like what it means to make up like Jess Whaley was just so important and has been so important for me moving forward. Whereas when I first started this, I was so fixated on different foods, adding foods, taking away foods, and now focused on like who am I? And I think integrating that a lot sooner might have supported me a lot sooner.
Yeah, I love that. Just starting small, and you never know where it could lead to.
Exactly.
So thank you so much, Jess, for joining me today and for being um so authentically you and open to this conversation. So I really appreciate it, and I think the viewers or listeners will get a lot from it.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for thinking about me and having me on here. This has been great.
So thank you everybody for listening or watching. Let us know what your thoughts are in the comments, and keep an eye out for next episode, the first of every month.